Welcome, welcome. So the whole subject is the solarized mind, the soul and its angelic companion. Let me first give you kind of an overview of some of the subjects, the subtopics we'll be covering in this. Obviously it has a lot to do with mind, but in particular the solarized mind, which is another way of saying the mind that has been inspired by the soul. So we're going to be looking at what does that mean, the solarized mind. We're going to be exploring the nature of the solar angel, which is said to be an angelic life that overshadows each of us. Each of us have this angelic life that not only is with us, but is actually in a strong way is supporting the development of your higher consciousness, and has been with you for 18 million years, give or take a couple. Been around a while. So we'll look at that in a very deep way. We're going to look at the causal body. The causal body is the structure deep inside each of us that holds our higher consciousness. It's found in the higher mental plane. We're going to take a look at that and its relationship to the solar angel that is overshadowing you at this moment. We'll be also looking at analysis of the petals of the lotus. I want to get into a little bit deeper understanding of what does each of these petals represent. We're going to look at the solar logos as well. The solar logos is the entity that ensouls the whole solar system, of which you and I are, as I mentioned last night, you and I are cells of consciousness within its beingness. And there's an intimate relationship between the solar logos and the solar angel. So we'll take a look at that as well. Then if we have enough time, we'll see, I want to get into the question of sun worship and understand that from a deeper perspective. And if my history is any indicator of the future, I suspect there will be the unexpected tangent or two along the way. All right? So feel free to ask questions. I think I'll start without questions, and I'll open it up for you to ask questions. So let's get into this. Let's start by just looking at, the subject of mind itself. What is mind, What is mind? And from the esoteric point of view, the mind can be broken down in many ways. From a certain perspective, we could say that the mind is, there's three parts to the mind, the human mind. There's what is called the concrete mind, which is the analytical mind. That's the mind that sees factually, that is attentive to detail. Then the second level would be the so-called abstract mind, or higher minds, let's say abstract mind. And that's the mind that sees broad patterns, broad principles. And then you have what is called the sun of mind, S-O-N, sun of mind. And that's a title given to, in old times, in ancient times, to the mind of the soul itself. The sun of mind is another way of saying the mind of your higher consciousness. And it's the sun of mind that is the thing that carries from one incarnation to the next incarnation to the next incarnation. It is a great source of wisdom. It holds your wisdom. It holds your wisdom. So in other words, the lower mind is factual and concrete. The higher mind is abstract and theoretical. And the sun of mind, which is the solarized mind, is earned wisdom. Earned wisdom. But there's so many interesting things to say about the mind. One of the things that's important to realize is that there's a difference between the mind and the content of mind. A lot of times people muddle that up. There's, the Tibetan in the Alice Bailey writings has a great definition for mind. He says, mind is the organizing principle. The organizing principle. It's the process inside where things are manipulated and moved to create thoughts, to create feelings, to create interpretation of sensation. So mind is really the faculty of motion within that builds thoughts. But there's a difference between the process of thinking and the product of that thinking. So content of mind is different than mind itself. It's an important distinction. And actually there's three things to distinguish. There's, let me just write it down here, and there's the thinker, there's thinking, and then there's a thought. The thinker is the beingness in each of us. Thinking is the process of motion, the motions of the mind, and thought is the product of those motions. But we muddle them up. We muddle those three things up. And they all kind of feel like they're all tangled together. In many ways, the whole spiritual path is untangling it. Starting to slowly pull away from the process so that the thinker can be discerned from the process of thinking and the product of those processes. Do you follow that? You get that? So and that's the function of detachment. The function of detachment is to do that. So mind can be viewed in the way that we've been talking about it. Another way to understand mind is in a higher sense. There's individual mind, there's group mind, and there's universal mind. So we have another way of dividing mind. And when we think of individual mind, that's more the basis of personality. It's the mind nature of the lower self. When we think of group mind, we're thinking the soul's mind. The soul, your soul is very attentive to the consciousness of a larger group that it's a participant in. We'll get into that. And then there's the so-called universal mind. That's the mind of the greater life that we are all a part of. One could say it's the mind of God or the mind of the Logos. That's also part of it. So again, mind can be differentiated in many ways. But when we talk about the solarized mind, that's really unique because we're looking at the consciousness of your causal body. Now I want you to get used to that term causal body because it really is central to this workshop. It's the causal body is found on the mental plane, higher mental plane, and it represents three things. It holds three things for you in terms of your spiritual life. The first is this, that the causal body is the structure inside you and I that holds the wisdom that has been garnered over thousands of lives. For thousands of lives, we have each been incarnate, we have experiences, we struggle to learn through those experiences, and all of those experiences are then translated and integrated into this thing called the causal body as wisdom. Wisdom is, you might say it's earned. You've earned it through the crucible of many, many incarnations. So much of what we call your soul's consciousness is actually earned consciousness. You've earned it through the struggles of many incarnations. And now it's built into the fabric of the deeper part of you, into the causal body as wisdom. And it's that wisdom that moves from one incarnation to the next and to the next. So that's one factor or feature of the causal body that I want you to be aware of. Another is that the causal body is the place inside you where you sense a deep, abiding love. The kind of love that transcends the personal, as I mentioned last night. It's the kind of love that recognizes larger wholes. The love of humanity, the love of service, the love of the one life, the recognition of yourself in another. It's that kind of love that the causal body innately holds. That's a quality in your vehicle, your higher consciousness that is built into the fabric of the causal body itself. The causal body is by nature Christ-like in the nature of its substance. When people say, for instance, the Christ in you, what are they really saying? They're talking about that's a reference to your own causal body. Your own causal body is the Christ in you. It's naturally sensitive to the Christ principle, and that's innately in the substance of the causal body itself. And the third point, the third idea that is, or I should say influence in the causal body that shapes your future and shapes your multi-incarnational journey is the solar angel itself, which is what so much of this is about. The solar angel is an angelic life that has a direct relationship to that causal body. And it is, at times, the thing that is trying to inspire your causal body with a new type of wisdom that is beyond what you earned, beyond the wisdom you've garnered over thousands of lives. There are those times, you know. There are those times when something happens, some insight comes that seems transcendent to anything you've ever learned. It's beyond you and your experience. That's often a gift from the solar angel that's trying to implant a seed of intuition in you that can move you forward. Sometimes people, for instance, you've heard the expression that everybody has a guardian angel. You've heard that? The guardian angel? Well, what is the guardian angel as understood here? The guardian angel is understood as the protective aspect of the solar angel. The solar angel is much more than a protector, but one of the factors of it has a protective element of it. So when people say, I sense my guardian angel, they're really sensing the protective aspects of their solar angel. Get that? Follow that? Okay. Now, what I'm going to do is we're going to take a look at what a lot of definitions of what the solarized mind is, and I'm going to talk about each of them. And you have a handout that I think is in your packet that you want to look at on this. Let me just do it one more time here. There we go. There we go. Okay. So let's take a look at this. The solarized mind, and I'm wondering if this light do we need the light for the video or, okay. So can you see that okay? Yeah. Your kids, okay. The solarized mind is sensitive to the heart of the sun. Okay, so let's talk about that. In this philosophy, it's understood that the sun is more than just this object in the sky. As I said last night, the sun is a living agency. The sun is, in a way, deity. You and I are atoms of consciousness within the sun, within the solar logos. And there are three parts to the sun that we're going to get into later. There's the physical sun that you see, and that corresponds to your personality nature. The physical sun has a lot to do with giving vitality and animation to your lower nature. But then there's something called the heart of the sun. The heart of the sun is a reference to the soul nature of the sun. And it's not in physical form. It's its own causal body. It's its own higher nature. Remember, the sun is an entity now. And then there's something beyond that called the central spiritual sun. And that has a lot to do with what might be called the monadic nature of the sun, or the spirit nature of the sun. But your soul has an intimate relationship with the heart of the sun, the soul nature of the sun. So that's what that's a reference to. Let's take a look at the next one. The solarized mind represents the consciousness of the soul or the causal body, which I mentioned already. Okay? Number 3. It is the Buddhi-manasic experience of consciousness. Now, I don't know if you're familiar with those terms. Buddhi is, in Hinduism, Buddhi is pure intuition, and manasic, or manas, is the word for mind. Your causal body is very much an instrument inside that's designed to bring mind and intuition together. You know, in Hinduism, it is said that the whole evolution of human consciousness is to move into Buddhi-manas. That is to say, move into your causal body, the instrument that can blend intuition and mind together, and to move away from what is called kama-manas. Kama in Hinduism or in Sanskrit means desire. Desire mind, kama-manas, is the consciousness of the masses, desire mind. The idea is that through your evolutionary processes and your development, you move from kama-manas to Buddhi-manas, and it's the causal body that supports you in that idea of being both intuitive and mind-oriented at the same time. Brings the two together. Okay? All right. The solarized mind it holistically perceives reality. So when you look out in the world, when you have those moments where you look out and you see that things that seem separate are not so separate, when you sense that there's real deep interconnections between things, it's a more holistic view. You start seeing in larger wholes. at that moment, when you have that perception, that moment is a moment where the causal body, the soul itself, is participating in the shaping of your perception at that moment. I should mention that that's one of the amazing things about this philosophy. You know, it talks about the soul in many, many, many ways, but so often in the mainstream, the soul is something you become particularly interested in at the end of your life, sort of hoping it exists. But the esoteric philosophy would say, why wait? The causal body, the soul's consciousness is available to you in the crucible of every moment of the day. Every moment of the day is a place where the soul has the opportunity to participate in the shaping of your thoughts and your perceptions and creating a heart response. And that sense of seeing the connections. Your personality is preoccupied with separateness. Your soul is preoccupied with unity. Your soul is not only, your personality is not only preoccupied with separateness and it's preoccupied with its uniqueness. The soul is preoccupied with its sameness with things. You know, it's when you see yourself in another, at that moment the causal body, the solarized mind is participating in your perception. When you're preoccupied with how you're different than another, and that's the personality dominating the perceptual process at that time. Okay? Everybody still with me? Okay. All right. The soul wants not for itself. It wants not for itself. So the soul is a very decentralizing force inside each of us. You know, it's not desirous. It wants to serve. It's the part of us that wants to make that uplifting contribution. In another section of this teaching, there's a whole thing called the 7 laws of the soul. The third law is the law of service. The law of service is the law that states that your causal body, your solarized mind, by definition it wants to work and express itself through the personality, the lower self. And it wants to do that without the personality getting in the way, which, as I said last night, is often the problem. And in so doing, it wants to express and uplift something beyond its own nature, beyond its own self, and that's service. And every soul is destined to be an agent of service in the world. And so we see it wants not so much for its own gain, but much more for the benefit of others. And service doesn't have to be rendered from a soul perspective to human beings. There are some people who their inner calling, their inner dharma is much more around service to one of the other kingdoms of nature. So you have some people that are maybe not even very effective with people, but they're really effective with animals. Or they're really committed to somehow sensing the plant kingdom and a commitment to work to the betterment of the plant kingdom. That's just as much an act of service as anything with human beings, you see. So when we think of service, widen your thinking out to see it in that larger context. Okay? The solarized mind recognizes the spiritual principles underlying outer events. You may recall last night I talked about the third eye and how the third eye is that part of us that looks deeper than the form of things to sense the living principle, the underlying patterns that are struggling to emerge through the form. That's the third eye is the eye of the soul. It's the eye of vision. And so when we can start sensing that, when you start to sense that in your day-to-day life, you know at that moment that the solarized mind, the soul, is in the game at that moment. And by the way, throughout this whole conversation today, I'm going to be talking about the soul as something for you to discover, and all of us to discover and live more. But the truth is, from another perspective, it is you. You know, it is you. You are the soul. And it's just a matter of your lower self recognizing that. See, the lower self has a tendency to identify itself and says, this is me. Self is, the personality is one of the great obstacles to personality, of the personality, is that it thinks it's an independent agent. It doesn't realize that it's merely an appendage. The soul is merely is trying to extend itself into personality and as personality, but the personality tends to have a mind of its own. And let me stop for a minute and just highlight that. So it's, for those of you who might be a little new to this, let me give you a structural context. You know, so often we talk about the soul and the personality as different. Like somehow here's the soul, here's the personality, and we talk in that duality a lot. And it's true that from a teaching perspective, it's wise to do that, to differentiate those two parts within us. But let's be more refined when we talk about personality and how it's different than the soul, because in a way it's not so different. Look at it this way. Your causal body, your solarized mind, is the thing that moves from one incarnation to the next incarnation to the next incarnation. Now when that causal body incarnates, it's not the whole causal body that incarnates. The main part of the soul is out of incarnation. The main part of the soul is always found on the higher mental plane. What incarnates is a thread of the soul called the sutratma. The sutratma. And it descends into lower substance, mental, emotional, and physical, at the time of incarnation. And through certain processes, it attracts substance to that thread. And it attracts mental substance, emotional substance, and physical substance. And that substance coagulates around that thread, that sutratma, and becomes the vehicles of the personality. One vehicle will be the mental body of the personality. Another will be the emotional, and finally the physical. And so you've got a thread of the soul incarnating into three layers of substance, form, enwrapping itself, you might say, in three layers of garments. But then what happens is this, that the soul then, or that thread I should say, that thread begins to confuse itself with the garments it's wearing. So it begins to say, I am my thoughts, I am my feelings, I am my physical sensations, I am the phenomena that I am experiencing now. That's personality. That's what we call personality. So what is personality in a deeper sense? It's just a fragment of the soul, incarnate into substance, and confusing itself with the phenomena that arises from that substance. You get that? And that the whole spiritual journey is to detach that thread, to help it remember that it's just it's an extension of the soul and not an independent agent. That's the real story here. But for teaching reasons, we speak of them as quite separate. But as you can see from what I've just shared with you, really not separate at all. Not at all. Okay? You could look at it this way. So, personality is simply the chosen style for the soul's outer expression. It just thinks it's on its own. We have to do something about that. Okay. All right. Solarized mind is the Christ in you. As I mentioned earlier, it's the Christ in you. When people wake up to the soul for the first time in some incarnation, they often get this confused. It's the born-again Christian who has the born-again experience and is suddenly saved and says, Jesus came to me and I'm now saved. From the esoteric point of view, that's not what happened. Jesus didn't come to you. What happened is you had an inner experience of your own causal body, which is Christ-like. And because you were raised, this person was raised in a Judeo-Christian context, the personality has only that as a foundational reference point for explaining that experience that just happened. And it sure felt Christ-like to the personality, and that's what the personality has been told Christ is like. So there's a confusion here. You're not really discovering Jesus, you're discovering the Christ in you, because remember that causal body holds the quality of the Christ principle naturally in the fabric of the substance that it is made up of. And we're going to talk about that substance in a bit. So that's what I'm trying to say here. Okay? Eight, that tends to be focused on the needs of others and the larger whole. And I've already mentioned that. Okay? The needs of others. Okay? Focused on needs of others. Yes?
I have a question about that.
Okay?
So, are you saying that Jesus doesn't exist?
Not at all. There's a great... Oh, the question is, I'm going to be reminded occasionally to repeat the question. Jared's back there going, that's his signal. I got it. The question is, by what I just said, am I saying that there is no such person as Jesus? And the answer is no, I'm not saying that at all. This philosophy is there's clearly a great being called Jesus, and there's also another great being called Christ, and they're different. Jesus is a disciple of the Christ, but not the Christ himself.
I get that.
Yeah. But what I'm saying is that often what people call their awakening and their being saved is actually not of Jesus. It's actually of the Christ in them for the first time being discovered. But in no way am I saying that there's no Jesus. Jesus today is a 6th degree initiate and oversees the whole 6th ray ashram.
So are you saying that Jesus is part of us and also separate?
No. No, I'm not saying that. I'm saying that your causal body is a natural recipient of the Christ principle, which is universal. Huge. The Christ principle is cosmic in scope. It is the principle of love and wisdom and unity found in all things throughout all of creation. The Christ is a high-level being that holds that Christ principle higher than any of us. The Master Jesus is a disciple of the Christ, and you and I have an instrument inside us that's also receptive to that. You have another question, it looks like.
Someone who would have an out-of-body experience with Jesus,
Uh-huh.
are you saying that that's the causal body?
Okay, so she's asking if somebody has an out-of-body experience with Jesus, is that the causal body? The answer is maybe, maybe not. That's a different story. When you talk about an out-of-body experience, that's a different story than what I'm talking about. Okay? But it could be. It could very well be. Some people have what they think is an encounter with Jesus is an actual encounter with their own higher nature. And that's so interesting because so often, that's what a lot of channeling is. Not all channeling, but a lot of it. People think that another master is speaking to them, when in fact what's really going on is a higher part of their causal body is unfolding for the first time. And it because it's foreign and profoundly wise, it's interpreted by the lower self as an entity outside oneself. It's actually an aspect of your own higher nature that's being realized for the first time. But having said that, there are such things as another being touching you, although very rare, but that can happen. Too often, what we think is an external entity is a denial of our own realization of a higher part of ourselves that is coming alive for the first time. It's amazing how often people want to deny their own divinity. It's truly amazing. I do another workshop. It's called You Are the Divinity You Seek. You are the divinity you seek. You are God incarnate. You are a God in the making. You are a Christ in the making. Each one of us is a Christ in the making. So the first bias should be that when something happens to you of a deep spiritual nature, the first bias should be, I've just discovered another aspect of my higher nature. That should be the default setting, rather than an external source. Not to say an external source is impossible. There are examples where that is true. But realize you are a divinity in the making. Okay? Does that make sense to everybody?
Yes.
Okay? Okay, where am I here? Number 8. Let's go to number 9. The solarized mind represents earned wisdom plus Christ-like love plus solar angelic intelligence. I mentioned that earlier. Remember I said there are 3 things that the causal body holds for you. The wisdom that you have earned over thousands of lives. Secondly, Christ-like love, meaning that causal body is made up of Christ vibration. It's sensitive to the Christ principle. And third, solar angelic intelligence, this angelic influence that will continue to shape your experience and at times will seed your mind with some deep insight, an angelic life. Okay? So we did talk about that. And number 10 is the source of spiritual revelation. when you have a revelation about something, 9 times out of 10, or maybe 99 times out of 100, that revelation, again, is not coming from some external agency. It's coming from your own causal body. And what is revelation, anyway? About a year ago, I did a workshop in this country called Revelation, Holding the Mind Steady in the Light. Was anybody there for that one? Aha, good. So here's a quiz question. No, I'm just kidding. I won't do that to you. That's not fair. That's not fair. The Revelation is so interesting because it's really a story of light. Revelation is a story of light. And here's a concept that I hope you remember. Light is known by what it reveals. Light is known by what it reveals. And that's a key concept when you understand the revelatory light that comes forth from the causal body. You know, on a practical level, if I look outside at a beautiful tree, it's light, it's physical light that's reflecting off that tree, bouncing off of it and hitting my eye. So light is known by what it reveals, you see. But now take that further, and realize that's just physical light. There's also the light of wisdom. There's the light of love. There's the light of idealism. There's the light of compassion. There's the light of purpose. You know, there's in the esoteric literature, in the Alice Bailey writings, I one time did a search on all the references to light of. There's something like 150 of them, different types of light that is revealed to us. And most of them, not all, but most of them are really coming forward through the causal body, through your own higher nature. It's the great revelatory agency inside us. Okay?